In Lesson 7 of Unit 3, you expand on the skills that you learned in Lesson 1, which dealt with basic grading. The exercises here will walk you through the steps required to grade a subdivision using a number of different data types and starting from the actual corridor model. In Exercise 1, you learn how to create and edit feature lines. In Exercise 2, you create an interim grading surface. In Exercise 3, you create a grading footprint. In Exercise 4, you create grading objects. In Exercise 5, you create final grading surface and calculate the volumes. And in Exercise 6, you label the final grading surface. The first step is to create feature lines, and we start with the corridor model because this is essentially a starting point for elevations and locations, and we can create a feature line at the corridor right-of-way location. We can then offset these feature lines horizontally and vertical to model the overall flow characteristics of the site, and then we can create other feature lines by extracting elevations from a temporary surface. So feature lines are the polylinear 3D elements that we use for grading, and that's what we see here. What we do in Exercise 1 is we create feature lines from the corridor model, and we can create a right-of-way feature line that can be used as the starting point for grading to adjacent parcels. And on the ribbon you can see you have feature line, create feature line from corridor. You can pick the corridor feature line and you can create that right-of-way feature line. And you then join them together to make a single feature line, which we would then offset further using the create offset, the stepped offset command. And then we would offset this even further to locate a feature line beyond the back of lots. So let's have a look through that. Here's the final site here. We will just open another drawing just to walk through the process. And here's our corridor model in the drawing. And if we went to the Create Design panel of the Home tab of the ribbon under Feature Line, we can create feature line from corridor, and then we can pick the feature line here. We can assign a style called grading, and we won't make a dynamic link to the corridor. There's one feature line. Here's another feature line. And then the third feature line is right here. So these are three separate feature lines. Now the next step would be to join these together. So we can pick one feature line, and then on your ribbon, your contextual ribbon, you have a number of commands here. You can see the join command, and we can join that feature line, and we can join that feature line, and now we have a single feature line. Then we can use the stepped offset command, and we're prompted for an offset distance, and we can either pick 2 points for that distance, or we can type in a number. So if we just looked at a distance here, this distance here is approximately 25 feet, so we could use the stepped offset command. And when prompted for the distance, we can say 25 feet, and how do we want to, what side would we like to go to? We can pick a side, and then the elevation difference, or we can go G for grade, and the grade would be positive 2%, and there's a stepped offset of 2%. So there's a 2% grade now being modeled between those two feature lines. So that's essentially what we've done here. And then we could do another 2% to create another feature line beyond the limit of the back of the lots. So in Exercise 2, what we do is we actually create this interim grading surface. So let's have a look at that. We'll just open up the second drawing here. And here are the three feature lines that we just discussed, and they model the overall flow characteristics of the site. So now what I can do is pick a single feature line, right click, select similar to grab all of the feature lines. Oops, try that again. Right click and select similar, and then right click, add to surface as breakline, and let's create a new surface here, and let's call this Interim Grading, and display this as triangles. And the whole idea now is that we have this interim grading surface that generally models the overall flow characteristics of the site. So up 2% and then down 2%. And what we'll do is use this surface and then create a feature line along the back of the lots and extract the elevations from that surface, and then we'll grade down to a surface. So the scenario with this is that we're only grading these lots here. This would be a phase 2 grading, so we're going to grade from the back of these lots down to the surface. So you can see we added the surface as breakline data and we created this interim grading surface. And then in exercise 3 is where we create this grading footprint. So we're going to create a feature line along the back of these lots by extracting the elevations from that interim grading surface. And you can see how we've done that in these diagrams here. And there's lots of commands in Civil 3D to create or extract elevations from a surface. But if you pick a feature line here, and there are lots of ways to do this. If we click Edit Elevations, this will allow me to display a number of commands here that I can assign elevations from a surface. So if we edit elevations, we can do it that way, or we can right click and go into the elevation editor, and you can use this command here to assign the elevations from a surface. So a number of different methods there. And we then add the corridor datum surface to this final surface, this interim grading surface. And then what we do is remove that outer breakline, and so you're left with just this surface. So you can see we've got the surface including the corridor datum graded up to the property setback and then out to the back of the lots. And then in the final exercise you create a grading object, and doing so you've graded down to a surface, down to the existing ground surface from the back of the lots. So if we close this drawing down here, you can see that grading object right here. So let me just suppress the display of this surface object by modifying the surface properties and assigning a no display style. And so here we have the grading to that surface. So if I was to pick the grading object, right click, and went into my grading editor, this went to a surface existing ground using a 5:1 slope. If we went 3:1 slope, you'll see how the grading recalculates, and you're using a now 3:1 slope and cut, and in fill you've got the 5:1 slope as well. So that is the creation of the grading object. And you create the grading object using the grading creation tools. So you select the grading group, which is the collection of grading objects. You select your criteria here and you specify a target surface, and that will create the grading object. And then you finally create a design surface in exercise 5 that shows your proposed grading. So if we look at FG Cedar and went into surface properties and assigned the triangle style, you can see there's your design surface. And notice that the surface automatically updated when we changed that grading object. So this design surface could be used for quantity calculation and or for labeling spot elevations and slope labels. And here's where you can calculate the volume between two surfaces, and you can also label spot elevations and slope labels on the design surface. So that concludes the discussion on Lesson 7 in Unit 3, which addresses site grading for subdivision projects.